Welcome to Live with Search Engine Land. I'm Ginny Marvin. I'm the editor-in-chief of Search Engine Land, and I hope you've enjoyed the past couple of days for those of you who've been with us for SMX Next. We today are going to be discussing the important and pressing topic of diversity, recruitment, and retainment, specifically in marketing, but obviously a lot of us are in broader organizations. This is, of course, not a new issue, but the Black Lives Matter movement and protests sparked by the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery bring us to a moment that feels like a catalyst for greater understanding, more listening, and importantly, for action. Marketing, like most professions, has a long way to go in having its ranks and leadership reflect our society. Just one stat, just 3% of American, North American advertisers, ANA member companies, just 3% of CMOs of those companies are Black. Even though African Americans represent roughly 14% of the US population. And I was listening to a recent interview with Shelley Archambault, who's a prominent Black leader. She's been former CEO of MetricStream and now sits on the boards of Verizon, Nordstrom, and Okta. And it's a fascinating interview that I'll put this resource in the links, but she said we have to capitalize on this moment and the movement to ensure that we don't go back to business as usual. And so thank you so much to everyone who's joining us today to help make sure that we don't go back to business as usual. And today I'm really thrilled to be joined by Zenia Johnson, CJ Bland, and Jackie Leung to discuss actionable ways that we can affect change in our organizations. Zenia Johnson is an account lead at digital agency 3Q Digital, and we first met a little over a year ago now at SMX Advanced, where she spoke on advanced social media marketing strategies, and got to see her again in March, kind of right before all this happened. And CJ Bland is co-founder, CEO, and principal consultant of the Minority Professional Network, which specializes in DE&I recruiting and retention, marketing, training, speaking, and consulting. And Jackie Leung is director of talent acquisition at the digital agency Wpromote, and she oversees all hiring practices nationwide and leads the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And I want to just thank Jackie's colleague Simon Polton connected us and deserves a lot of the credit for kind of spearheading this session. So thank you and welcome for being here. And before we dive in, I just want to acknowledge, I know we have a heavily white audience here, and I know that a lot of these discussions can feel awkward, and we don't all have a lot of practice talking about race and diversity openly and constructively, which is why we need to do more of it more often and commit to listening, talking, and learning. So thank you all for being here. And again, I will quote Shelley Archambault saying, "This is a marathon, not a sprint." So our commitment is crucial. So without further ado, I'd love to get the discussion started and just open it up first to the three of you about why diversity, equity, and inclusion is good business. If we can start there, we'd love to get us started on that topic. CJ, I'll turn that to you.
Okay, I was going to let the ladies go first. All right. Okay, so as Jen indicated, I'm CJ Bland. I've actually been in this space since 1988. I actually launched in my professional work back in 1988 and went corporate in 2001. Now, even Jenny may not be aware of this, but part of the reason I eventually moved into this direction, I left AT&T as a sales director to launch this company. I was moving up the ladder pretty rapidly, but decades ago, my oldest brother was murdered standing at the bus stop just because he was Black. I was having a conversation with him when I was a teenager. He went out the house to catch a bus, and literally three young white males killed him because they were seeking revenge on the first N-word person that they saw. Unfortunately, it happened to be him. And I always said that it's very ignorant to have a problem against someone over something they have absolutely no control over. Nobody's in their mother's womb pressing buttons. So I don't want to be black, white, Hispanic, male, female, rich, or poor. So I've always spent most of my life trying to bring people together. And that's part of the reason why I launched MPN and I've been in this space for the last 20 plus years. So it's very important because at the end of the day, the labor pool is constantly changing, as well as our consumers. So at the end of the day, how we market our products and our services today to attract talent, not only to attract talent, but also to retain talent, is quite different than even when I started my career a couple of decades ago. So if for companies to be competitive and identifying, retaining, promoting, attracting, retaining, and promoting Black and brown talent, as well as other underrepresented minorities, we have to look at things a whole lot differently. So conversations like this are very important because I think the more we understand about one another, the more inclusive we can be. So the labor pool, as well as our consumers, is forcing change, is driving change. I've seen it happen over the last few decades. I think it's very important. And thank you so much, Ginny, for spearheading this type of dialogue.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Jackie? Why? I guess if you can talk a little bit about your work at Wpromote and how you're thinking about this from a business perspective.
Yeah, no, of course. So as a digital marketing agency, we work very closely with our clients. And I think it's really important to CJ's point where we have to be, as a company on the agency side or the client side, to represent the overall population, what our consumers are. In order to do that, we need to have an employee population that represents that from all different backgrounds, and not just speaking about race as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, but whether someone's a veteran or any disabilities or anything along those lines. It has to be a very wide group of individuals so that we can do a good job of marketing. And I know, to your point, Ginny, you talked about this being a marathon. It's very true. I think us as agencies, at least I can speak on our end, is it's really important that we bring this up to our clients. It shouldn't be something where our clients are saying, hey, we don't see representation in the room. It should be really the other way around. I think it's time for us to really take a stronger stance. I mean, in our industry, it's very well known that it skews more Caucasian, and I think this is really a great time to us to focus on making that change.
That's great. And how about you, Zenia?
Well, they've said most of the important stuff, but I will also add that financially it's good business for the organization as well. There's a ton of studies that have been published and shared where companies who have a more diverse leadership team, as well as a more diverse team throughout the entire organization, tend to have there's a positive correlation with their financial performance. So not only is it good business for the community that you're in and that you're working with and participating in, but it's also good business for an organization's bottom line.
Yeah, that's I'm going to actually put in the chat for everyone. There are a couple of good studies, and well, there are actually more than good, a couple, but there's one from McKinsey, and that showed some really interesting points. Let's see if I can type and admit at the same time. Okay. So yeah, companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. There's another study in the UK found that businesses with culturally diverse leadership teams were more likely to develop new products than those with homogeneous leadership. So it comes to, decision making, innovation, all of these studies have shown that diversity makes good business. And so from how we're advising clients, how we are constructing the teams that we're working on to drive our own businesses forward, all of this points to diversity, and investing in diversity is better business. And so I guess in terms of talking about investing in this and it being a marathon, I know that the more and more I realize this is and talking to CJ and Jackie as well, that this requires intentional commitment, both from a time, resources, financial commitment by companies. And so I would just love to hear from your experiences what that looks like, what that commitment looks like in an organization. And whoever wants to go first would be great.
I can start. So in terms of overall intention, I think to your point, it takes from C-suite all the way down. I think it's really important that they acknowledge that this is important to the company as a whole and what our action plan is. So I think that communication is key. Being there to listen, being an executive sponsor, for example, to any employee resource groups that may develop and encourage those groups to develop as the diversity.
Can you explain the resource groups, ERGs? Can you explain what those look like and how an organization that doesn't have those might think about starting those, and how do they get started, and a little bit more on those? That'd be great.
Yeah, of course. So these are voluntarily run by employees and led by employees of any organization. And any employee can run it. It doesn't necessarily have to be that they're from a certain department. So for any organizations that don't have it, the first thing I would do is just start the conversation. Obviously, it is a really important topic, but an even bigger topic right now. So there is a lot of interest in discussing, for example, how do we get more diversity, at a particular company or our company, and just having conversations with the employees about their experiences, what they're looking for, what they're interested in, and potentially if they're open to leading, and then guiding them through that process. For us, we are, working on additional employee resource groups, and some of them can include, it could be a lot of different things. We have a Wpro Pride for our LGBTQ+ community. We have Rise, which is for women empowerment. And we also have a group that's being formed right now, which is Black W Promoters, which we're really excited about. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done in terms of actual guidelines, making sure that as the groups form, there is an overall mission and goal that they're working towards. And what does that mean for the company? How can they help? So there's a lot of intricate pieces to it, but I really think getting started is having these conversations and opening it up company-wide and saying, hey, this is something that we potentially want to have with the company. Is anyone interested? And encouraging amongst employees.
And I would like to add to what Jackie just shared. If companies are not intentional, very often programs may get started, but we don't have any type of metrics around what type of progress we're making. So I think, as Jackie alluded to, it has to start at the top, from the C-suite. There needs to be vision, guidelines, goals, in my opinion, metrics, targets, and even scorecards to be able to hold individuals accountable for meeting or striving to meet those hierarchical goals. And if you don't have that, what happens is CEO, C-level executive, they may be championing the cause, but if there's no way to be able to measure the progress, and I said this in the article that you interviewed us for, Ginny, that if a company, for example, has 90% white employees in 2015 and only 10% minority, 5 years later, it can't look the same. If you've had attrition or growth and you're adding like 5,000 employees per year, for example, on average, it shouldn't look the same in 2020. And in my opinion, unless we do have written and documented goals, any executive should be able to, at any time, have some idea how many Black, brown, Asian, female, LGBTQ employees do we have at our company? How many have been interviewed? How many have been hired? So I think that is very, very important. And with me being an engineer, physicist, and MBA, I'm really heavily driven around data as well. And I just think that unless we're intentional and we have some type of metrics in place to be able to measure our performance, it's going to fall through the cracks, and sometimes it's going to become business as usual, and things are going to still look the same.
And then I would like to just piggyback again on what they both said. There was a few weeks ago this push for Black advertisers to sign this open letter to agencies and other industry professionals, basically mapping out this 12-point plan as to what agencies and what businesses can do to figure out how can they start having these conversations. What are some of the goals that they need to be held to? Like CJ and Jackie said, like it has to start at leadership. If you're not in leadership, you can only care so much if there are no resources or goals attached to it. So it really has to start with leadership, and that was one of the key things that 600 and Rising is the name of the organization that spawned out of that open letter. That's one of the main components of that call to action. Getting your leadership in place.
I would actually, I'm going to jump ahead to the discussion about how employees can push for change. If you can follow up on that, Zinni, because if you're in an organization and you just want to be able to make action and change, and if you're not seeing that, or how do you bring that to leadership and say, no, this has to be institutionalized from the top down? What advice you have to employees who are wrestling with this?
So I think that I'm sorry, my husband is also on a call, so if you guys hear that, that's what's going on here with us all working from home. But first, being in an environment where you feel comfortable sharing those feelings, because honestly, before in previous jobs, I might not necessarily have felt comfortable sharing my feelings around diversity and recruitment, and feeling like I no longer want to be the only person who looks like me in a room. So I think that definitely starts with being at an organization where you're encouraged to share these feelings. And I found that as I get older, I kind of just don't care about what I'm saying as much. I don't care about really being nice about it. So maybe get older and work somewhere that encourages you to talk. But for a more direct, like, action item, finding someone in leadership or who's in the C-suite who is aligned with those goals, and then using them to advocate for you. That also is incredibly effective.
And I'd also like to add, I think it's very, very important to do research. If you look at how your company is performing compared to some of your competitors, for example, if you're with some major corporation and you find out one of your competitors, their scorecards are significantly better than yours, I think that that's data that you can use to build your business case. So do the research up front. Recognize that I think sometimes people may have a tendency to get a little bit maybe too emotional about it, but I find that if you're able to keep your calm, your course, and let the data speak for itself, identify mentors or advisors. They may not be at the C-suite. They could be a director, maybe some other middle manager, or maybe you have access to someone outside of your company who you can bounce your ideas off of. And I think we also touched on this in the article, Jenny. So if you're able to do that, have a plan, be focused, persistent, and persuasive. And don't be afraid to find that champion, someone who can maybe get to that C-level person whom you cannot get to. And don't be afraid to take a risk. It's interesting, maybe because of my background, I've taken risks throughout my career. Sometimes it's worked in my favor. I recall, like, even on a consulting engagement, it's really crazy, and as to look at it in hindsight. When I was early at AT&T, and I was being one of the persons selected to escort presidents of business unit, she asked me, it's like, hey, so what do you want to do? I was like 22, 23 years old, and this is AT&T. I said, okay, hey, one day maybe I want to be. Bob Allen was the CEO of AT&T. One day maybe I want to be CEO. And it's really interesting coming from a 22, 23-year-old person. That may sound like, wow, he's been really cocky or whatever. But no, if that's what I put my mind to and I'm aspiring to do that, that's my goal. How do I get there is the roadmap. And literally years later, when I was promoted to director, this same president of the BU was one of my references because I was able to establish that relationship and have that type of mentor. Most people, as you indicated, Zenia, up until recently, my wife and I were talking about this. We both worked for many major household name firms over the years. A lot of times you go into an office environment and something similar to what happened to George Floyd and others recently, everybody wants to be hush, 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 hush about it. Nobody wants to talk about it like it did not happen. But I think that's part of the problem. No one, when my brother was murdered, my mother did not tell me to go out and hate all white people because I asked for three people. That would be totally wrong. Those were three people that made certain decisions, and even decades later, it still bothers us as we think about it. But I'm not going to go out and have a problem with everybody else. I don't like to put everybody in a box, and I think that we have to look at the strengths and what people bring to the table, and finding ways to be able to leverage that. So yeah. So be persuasive, be intentional, focus, and don't be afraid to take any risks.
Love that. And I think I just
a little bit, Ginny, if you don't mind.
no, that's great.
Yeah, I agree with both those points. But in addition, I think it's, if these protests, tell us anything, it's band together, build that community, talk to others in, other employees that are interested. And the more people that get involved, the more powerful the movement is going to be.
Yep.
And on that, I want to touch on allyship and the role that white people need to play in this. And I don't mean to put this on you to tell us how to act. I know that that's weighty and annoying. I will just say I did put in this a link. I love the podcast. So podcasts aren't your jam, or if you're on Android, sorry, but there is a really great interview that I put in here about how white people can talk about racism. And it was so helpful to me because, like I said in the beginning, a lot of us are raised not to talk about race, not to acknowledge race, just to the colorblind, and that the idea that we could be racist is so just like we shut down. And so to be able to come to these discussions, open, learning, listening. And so I guess from a allyship piece, and maybe you don't need to comment on this, I just want to say that we play a role in this. And I don't know, or if you do want to comment, I just think it's a really important piece that we've kind of woken up to, I guess.
I definitely have an example from a few hours ago, actually, that I would like to speak to. I'm sure we're all very familiar with the organization PPC Hero. They published their top 25 list of advertisers today, and there were no Black people on the list. Going back 5 years, there's only one Black person on the list. So I went ahead and called them out. They're engaging on Twitter, but a lot of white allies who I formed that community with on social media are now stepping in and calling for responsibility and, a plan from PPC from BBC Hero. So I think that, you know, shouldering some of that work, shouldering the work of having those conversations and calling people out, is just, it takes such an emotional load off of a person
Yeah.
of color or a Black person who is constantly having these conversations and constantly thinking about these things.
Yeah, and I want to also add to that, Zenia. I just think that for the first time in my life, I really believe that America and maybe the global society is awake. There are a lot of things that have been going on for years that maybe people who have been directly impacted, Black and brown people, we've seen this for years. I would never ever say that a broad cross section of people are racist because I don't believe that. I just think that sometimes people they're not doing enough to speak up until recently. And I just hope that this momentum can continue so that we can have real change. Because most people at the end of the day, I don't want any handouts. I'm not looking for anybody to give me stuff. I've always just wanted a level playing field, an opportunity where my skills, hard work, work ethic, attitude, my ability to contribute was given a fair and equitable opportunity to do just that. And I think that, as you indicated with allies, I think that part of the biggest problem is when people in small groups, and I always say this could be like kitchen table type of conversation or water cooler type conversation. If you're in a room, and let's just say if it's all white colleagues, and someone makes a joke, an off-color joke, I just think that it's very important that we start speaking out against that. It's one thing to say that I'm not a racist, but it's a whole nother thing to say that I'm against any type of racism. And I think that that's critically important and what's really must happen in order for us to have a more comfortable and level playing field where we can leverage our differences as strengths, because there's so much beauty in different cultures and backgrounds. And the first question that Ginny asked, you can bring so many great ideas to the table if you have people from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different lenses. And I think that that's just critically important in order to bring forth the best ideas and to create a much healthier, safer, and more comfortable environment.
Yeah. And yeah, and I get it's that the idea of being anti-racist, and the book How to Be an Anti-Racist I would highly recommend. It is a very important mind shift for all of us. So I want to bring it back to recruiting, and we can start there. And there's always the discussion about pipeline, right? We've got this pipeline problem, and so I'd love to address that objection and what organizations should be doing to expand their recruitment networks. So Jackie, when you're looking at recruiting, how are you approaching it? And I guess if you could address the kind of pipeline objection that you hear, or if you hear
As I mentioned earlier, it's always the blame of like there's not that many colored or people of color in the industry as a whole. Like when I say industry, I mean digital marketing, I mean advertising in general. But the onus is on us as a company, as an agency, to make that shift and not have that mindset. So there's a lot of different things, such as partnering with organizations that do work with underrepresented minorities as it pertains to space in digital marketing. There's tons of programs there. There's also partnering with schools that rank very high from a diversity index, making sure that we reach out to them, post on their job boards. There's a lot of diversity job boards, which I'm sure CJ can speak to as well. But in addition to that, it's also reaching out to your internal employees for referrals, especially those that belong to the ERGs that we spoke about earlier, and ask them to reach out to their network and really expand overall. It's a lot of getting to know different organizations and what they bring, people with different backgrounds. One other push I would say is from a community outreach standpoint. So there are organizations, there's tons of nonprofits that companies can work with, whether it's pro bono work that we do or whether it is volunteering in general. And they have a wide network of how we can contribute as a company, and therefore, widens your network even more. But I think the last piece that I want to note here is it's a heavier lift, and that's the problem, is the heavier lift aspect of like, oh, this is extra effort. In the agency world, I'm sure you can attest to this, everything's very fast paced. Everything's like, hey, we need to hire this person, 2 months ago. Let's just bring in this person that already has the experience. I mean, that's easy. And the industry is very incestuous in a way where you jump from one agency to the next. But we need to hold ourselves accountable and look beyond that. And number one, we have to be prepared from a pipeline perspective. But number two, what are we looking at? We need to look at the core competencies of what they actually need to be successful in this role. Skills can be taught, but attitude, professionalism, communication, that's something that we should be looking for. So we need to take more time in looking for these individuals where we can train, whether they're looking to change into different industry and have a completely different background. The hiring managers need to be educated to look for that as well, aside from they worked at another agency.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are excellent points, Jackie. And this was one of the questions also in the article. Yeah, it's so easy to eliminate folks. That's the easiest thing to do, to say, okay, to do what's comfortable. But in order to do the right thing, we have to pretty much expand our horizons. And as Jackie, she's given a number of excellent points, no need for me to regurgitate that. But I would also say that if you're looking to increase the number of Blacks and Latinos, you should be familiar with organizations such as the Black engineers or the Black accountants or Hispanic engineers, different HBCUs, whether it's Spelman or whether it's Howard, or I graduated from 2 HBCUs, Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Dillard University. I recall when I was president of Black MBAs in Atlanta, I would have some people tell me they're having a hard time finding Black MBAs. But where are you going? Where are you looking? And MPN, we've attracted probably close to 2,000 clients, employers that are posted on our job board from at least probably over 45 different states. I mean, literally, we've seen a wide cross section of candidates, employers, but a lot of times, some of that's transactional. You're not focused on that strategic partnership like we did with the State Department in conjunction with JWT. Yeah, we worked with JWT when it started in 2003, I think it was, when Colin Powell was Secretary of State. The State Department's problem statement was, we're having a hard time. We're primarily only attracting white males from the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. We need to reach more minorities, more women. MPN, can you help us? That was a partnership from 2003 until 2017, where we planned 60 events for them, about 6 per year in 40 different cities. We had digital marketing campaigns online. We also pretty much social media. So, but they're trying to partner with the right organization who can help them. And the information is out there. So where are you looking? That's the question. And are you really seriously looking? Are you willing to move forward? Or you just want to throw a couple of crumbs across the fence and say, I'll post a job here or there, and I made an effort. I've seen that happen as well.
I was listening to John Rice, who's at the Management Leadership for Tomorrow organization, and he was talking about with this is do the outreach, go to the HBCUs and find the people, then match the job. So don't go with I got to find, like your point, Jackie, I've got this job, I just got to fill it. Have the network of the people that are going to bring, whatever their qualities are going to bring that to the organization, and then make that, figure out what job is best for them, which I thought was a really interesting perspective on it. And maybe would help open up those kind of the network channels, about instead of having that kind of reflexive reaction. I thought that was interesting. So I want to talk about retainment as well. And Zenia, you had mentioned, you're now in an environment where you feel comfortable talking about issues and about diversity. And so there's obviously, we've got the hiring problem and networks and getting people in. And then there's a real problem of retainment and advancement, right? So advancement is, again, like I said, there's 3% of CMOs are Black in the US. That's not acceptable. And so I would just love your thoughts on kind of what keeps you engaged at 3QD, Zenia, and where do you think companies should really be focused on kind of retainment and advancement efforts?
Yeah. So since being at 3Q, we formed a diversity committee with some offshoots as well. So people who are focused on diversity and hiring, people who are focused on making sure that the communities that we have within the office are encouraging these types of conversations. So firstly, just having those committees is incredibly helpful because it shows that the organization values those conversations. But also, we've had some conversations about having programs where we train women about leadership, like how to get to those leadership positions. Having really transparent conversations about how many women are in what positions, how many Black people are in these positions, how many people of Latino background are in certain positions. We've had those types of conversations at 3Q Digital, like in the format of all hands meetings. And I remember when I first participated in those, I was like, wow, I can't believe we're actively talking about how many Black people right now are across our various offices, because that's just something that is not the norm. So I think that the more that companies and organizations are really transparent about those numbers and saying, okay, we know we're not perfect, we know we're not there yet, but this is where we are and this is where we're trying to be. That is what keeps me, active and engaged.
That's great. Jackie, how are you at Wpromote thinking about advancement and retainment as well?
Yeah, of course. So we are launching a mentorship program where we match up from director and above, director and below. It's like a 6-month program with commitment. We can go into more detail, but essentially I think that helps when there is someone that you aren't directly reporting to, someone that's not in your department that you can actually talk to and tell any particular issues that you may have that you may not be comfortable telling your direct supervisor, for example. Someone you can ask for advice, someone that you can ask for advice of where to take your career. You might not want to be in the same department. Another thing that we are working on this year is the aspect of career pathing. So really looking at where you are, where you want to go, and that path is different for everyone. So it's really mapping out how each department looks, what you need to do to get to that next level, but really also coaching and guiding our employees of how to have those conversations. That's really important, I think. Having these weekly one-on-ones with your direct manager is also key, that you can actually openly talk about this. And I think something that now I speak specifically for Wpromote that we do well is we have that open environment where we encourage our employees to talk about what their career path looks like. And if they don't want to be in the same department, that's okay. We encourage the internal transfers. We've done it and we've been very successful. So I think to Zenia's point earlier, it's really encouraging open conversation and really acknowledging how we can do things and being serious about it, and having the different committees is also helpful. But I think having the career paths and the mentorship is our extra push as well.
Great.
Jenny, can I quickly add just one quick point?
Yeah.
I also think that reverse mentorship is very important. So since most organizations are definitely, especially executive leadership, still predominantly white, Black and brown, Asian, Latino, women's, it's very good to be able to have access periodically to an executive or someone director above, even if it's not their direct management, where they can really share things from their perspective. So what Jackie just discussed is like, how can that mentor help you advance your career? But I think it's very important to help educate as well, because if you can create a culture and environment where people feel like they belong, their culture, events, awareness of the different backgrounds. I think if companies broaden their perspective, and for example, I couldn't believe like if people haven't heard of Juneteenth, for example, or they haven't heard of, I forgot what is it, Hanukkah, and I mean, some of the different things that are more culturally based. I just think that sometimes that education could be critically important for individuals to be able to share that with leaders to really be able to create that perspective, and maybe they may be able to start have more awareness around that as well. So reverse mentorship is important to me.
That's it. And then I'm wondering about coaching as well. So, and how important is that? You know, just from a career management coaching, how do you manage people? How do you orchestrate? How do you communicate? Are you getting that from mentorships, or does it also kind of require, or can organizations benefit from also bringing coaching in, or having a coaching program?
Yep.
Or is mentorship, you think, does that do it?
I think bringing in outsiders also is helpful. I believe that everybody should have regular ongoing professional development training. I saw this early in my career, haven't seen it as much as in recent years, but bringing in outside folks from a coaching standpoint, a training standpoint, and also pretty much from diversity, since we're speaking about diversity. So if we bring in outsiders, sometimes people have a tendency to open up more. I've done a lot of facilitation over the years. So sometimes bringing in a facilitator, I don't know your environment. So, but I'm able to help bring forward a safer environment for you to be able to have good, healthy dialogue. So yeah, coaching is important internally and externally.
Great. And we've talked about culture. I asked Jackie and CJ this somewhat rhetorically. The idea that I want to hire people that are going to fit in my culture. I want to hire the person I can go have a beer with, and we can talk about how we all did the same things over the weekend. I think obviously that perpetuates this problem. So instead of saying, are they going to be a cultural fit? What should hiring managers actually be thinking about?
Okay.
I think they should be thinking about how this person can add. So I convert it to a culture add, but I really want to look for, okay, so is there anything we're missing on the team, whether it's a particular skill set or industry or anything along those lines? How can this person, how can this candidate add to what we have? How could they enhance what we have? I think it's more concentrating on that piece, whether that is because they have a different background in terms of work experience. I think that's really crucial because we as marketers need to be able to reach, yes, certain targets, but also a very diverse target as a whole. So I think really reaching out and looking at skills that we don't have as an organization would be a good start.
Yeah, because it's so easy to eliminate folks that you may not think you have as much in common with from a cultural standpoint. And sometimes a lot of Black and brown candidates are eliminated just because of that. Some people may feel that you cannot fit into a certain environment, but many of us throughout our career have been forced to assimilate. You assimilate and you adapt or you won't be there. So what I would suggest is alluding to what Jackie just shared, you also want to look for people that have certain soft skills. Are they coachable? Positive attitude? Are they willing pretty much to openly communicate? So there are a lot of skills. You want to have the critical skills, but I think that if you look at the overall, also how does this fit with our overall diversity and inclusion targets? So if you look at different factors, multiple factors, critical skills, soft skills, as well as pretty much how does this also help us to help our company become a whole lot more diverse so that we can not only attract those great talented individuals, but also keep them and advance them, and how we better serving our customers.
Yeah, that's great. Zenia, I'll give you the last word. We're just about the top of the hour, but.
I just think that we're gonna have to be really revolutionary in the way that we address this issue. The institutions that, you know, serve our communities are incredibly biased. Looking at candidates who, you know, all have college degrees, does that really serve our motivations well? Are we going to have to rethink the requirements for hiring? You know, compared to white students, Black and Hispanic graduates are more likely to have attended for-profit colleges. I used to be a financial aid officer at a for-profit college, and I saw the way those colleges would, you know, just basically underserve these communities. A lot of our agencies have really robust training programs. So I just think we kind of have to think outside of the box and look at where we can source these candidates from and making sure that we're giving and providing equitable opportunities to everybody.
That's great. I would just add on the college requirement, I think is really key. And I would also incarceration rates, obviously it becomes a huge problem. And so companies need to take that entirely off the table, or, you know, I don't know, there just needs to be massive reform for how incarceration affects employment as well. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for this discussion. And Zenia, CJ, and Jackie, thank you for your time and your insights. And I hope we can continue the conversation and the action.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ginny.
Bye.